Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get into it with an HOA, but here we are. Let me start from the beginning because this whole situation is still pretty unbelievable to me. I'm a retired mechanical engineer, and after spending 30 years dealing with corporate bureaucracy and office politics, all I wanted was some peace and quiet to work with my hands. When I bought my house about 5 years ago, it was perfect for what I had in mind. The place is an older farmhouse that sits on about 2 acres, with plenty of room for the workshop I'd been dreaming about since I was in my 20s. The house itself has character, which is a nice way of saying it's nothing like the cookie-cutter homes that surround it now. When I bought it, the property had been in the same family for decades, and they'd managed to hold on to it even as developers bought up everything around them. Eventually, the family needed to sell, and I was lucky enough to snag it before some developer could tear it down and put up 4 identical houses in its place. The workshop was my retirement project. I'm talking about a serious setup here, not some cluttered garage where you can barely find a screwdriver. This is a 1,200 square foot detached building that I designed myself and had built to my exact specifications. Climate controlled, proper electrical throughout, concrete floors with drains, the works. I've got a CNC machine, a metal lathe, a TIG welder, table saws, you name it. Everything organized and in its place just the way I like it. For the past few years, this workshop has been my sanctuary. I make custom furniture pieces, restore vintage tools and machinery, sometimes take on small fabrication jobs for friends. Nothing big, nothing commercial, just stuff I enjoy doing. The sound of the machinery, the smell of fresh cut wood, the satisfaction of creating something with your hands. It's everything I'd hoped retirement would be. The only fly in the ointment is the HOA that controls the development that went up around my property. They call themselves the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association, which is about as generic as it sounds. Most of the people are fine, just normal folks who move to the suburbs for good schools and safe neighborhoods. But like any HOA, they've got their share of busybodies who think everyone else's business is their business. The current president is a woman I'll call the HOA president since I'm trying to keep this anonymous. She moved to the neighborhood about 2 years ago and got herself elected president within 6 months. She's one of those people who clearly has too much time on her hands and has decided that micromanaging the neighborhood is her calling in life. You know the type. Always walking around with a clipboard, taking pictures of garbage cans that are out 5 minutes too early, measuring grass height with a ruler. From day one, she's had it out for my property. I can see it in the way she slows down when she drives past in her little golf cart, craning her neck to get a better look at my workshop. She clearly doesn't like that my older house doesn't fit the aesthetic of her perfect suburban paradise. The workshop in particular seems to offend her sensibilities. It's a large building, built to look professional rather than decorative, and you can see just the corner of it from the main road through the development. I've minded my own business, kept my property clean and well maintained, and generally tried to be a good neighbor. I wave when I see people, I keep my music down, I don't work late into the night with loud machinery, but apparently that's not enough for some people. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the workshop working on a custom dining table for my daughter, using a router to put some detailed edge work on the tabletop. It's not particularly loud work, especially during the day, and I always wear hearing protection anyway. I was focused on getting the curves just right when I heard someone pounding on the workshop door. I shut off the router and pulled out my earplugs. The pounding continued, insistent and aggressive. I walked over and opened the door to find the HOA president standing there with another board member, a guy who always looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. She had that clipboard of hers clutched in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. The first words out of her mouth were that my operations were in violation of community standards and that she'd received multiple complaints about the noise. I looked around, confused, because it was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and I'd been using a router, not a jackhammer. I asked her what specifically she thought was wrong, and she started rattling off complaints about unapproved industrial noise, unsightly commercial activity, and violations of the community's residential character. She was clearly reading from some sort of script, using phrases like industrial operations and commercial enterprise to describe what was obviously a hobby workshop. The guy with her, who I think is the treasurer, was shifting uncomfortably and wouldn't make eye contact. I got the feeling this was all her idea and he was just along for the ride. Then she handed me the manila envelope and told me it contained an official violation notice. She said the board was demanding a full compliance inspection of the workshop interior within 48 hours to assess the violations and determine appropriate fines. She said it like she was doing me a favor by giving me any warning at all. I took the envelope and looked at it, then looked back at her. I've dealt with enough bureaucrats in my career to know how these games are played. I told her very calmly that this seemed like a serious matter and asked her to send me the notice via certified mail, as required for all official board correspondence. I pointed out that I didn't see a certified mail receipt and couldn't accept unofficial documentation for what she was describing as a formal violation. You should have seen her face. She clearly expected me to either get defensive and start arguing, or to cave immediately and beg for mercy. Instead, I was treating her like the amateur bureaucrat she was and following proper procedures. She started sputtering about how she was hand-delivering it as a courtesy, but I just smiled and said I'd wait for the proper documentation. She left in a huff, dragging the treasurer along behind her. I went back to my router work, but I'll admit my mind wasn't really on the table anymore. I kept thinking about the words she'd used: industrial operations, commercial enterprise. Why would she describe a hobby workshop in those terms unless she was building up to something bigger? That evening, I started doing some research. I pulled out the file folder I keep with all the paperwork from when I bought the house. Title documents, surveys, inspection reports, all the boring stuff you get at closing and then hopefully never need to look at again. I figured if the HOA was going to play hardball, I should understand exactly what their authority was. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. The next day, I got the certified letter just like I'd requested. If anything, it was even more aggressive than what she'd tried to hand deliver. It accused me of running an unauthorized commercial operation, creating industrial noise pollution, and violating multiple community standards. It demanded immediate access for inspection and threatened daily fines of $100 starting from the day I'd received the original notice, which meant I was already supposedly $200 in the hole. But here's where it gets good. After I read through their letter, I went back to that file folder and really started digging into the legal documents. I found the master document for the HOA, something called the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It's about as exciting as it sounds, page after page of legal boilerplate about grass height and fence regulations and approved paint colors. But buried in all that bureaucratic nonsense was Section 2, which defines which properties are subject to the HOA's authority. Most of it was pretty standard, listing all the lots that were part of the original development. But then I found Section 2.b, labeled Excluded Properties. And there it was, clear as day. My lot, described by its exact legal description from the county records, was explicitly listed as excluded from the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Not subject to their authority, not liable for their assessments, not bound by their rules. When the original development was planned, my property had been legally carved out and excluded because it predated the HOA. I sat back in my chair and started laughing. Here was this woman, throwing around legal threats and demanding access to my property, and she didn't even have the authority to regulate my mailbox, let alone my workshop. But then I read through her letter again, and something clicked. She kept using words like industrial and commercial and enterprise to describe what I was doing, almost like she was suggesting that if it looked commercial, it should be regulated as commercial. That's when the idea hit me. If she thought my hobby workshop looked too much like a business, maybe I should just make it an actual business. Not because I needed to comply with her demands, but because turning it into a legitimate commercial operation would put it completely beyond her reach while also giving me a legitimate reason to expand the activities she was complaining about. I started researching what it would take to properly license a small fabrication business in our county. Turns out it's not that complicated if you already have the proper space and equipment. You need a business license, a home occupation permit if you're working from your residence, and, depending on what you're doing, maybe some additional certifications. Over the next week, while the HOA president was presumably waiting for me to cave to her demands, I was busy filing paperwork. I registered an LLC with the state under the name Ironwood Custom Designs. I applied for a county business license under the light industrial and custom fabrication classification. I filed for a home occupation permit, which required a site inspection to make sure my workshop met commercial safety standards. The county inspector who came out was actually pretty impressed. He said my workshop was cleaner and better organized than most commercial shops he'd seen. All my electrical work was up to code. I had proper ventilation and safety equipment, and my tools were professional grade. He approved the permit on the spot. I even applied for a sales tax ID number just to make everything completely above board. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The whole process took about 2 weeks, and during that time, I didn't hear a word from the HOA. I figured they were probably consulting with their lawyer or trying to figure out their next move. Little did they know I was preparing a move of my own. Once all my paperwork was finalized and I had my official business license in hand, I sat down to write a response to their demands. I wanted it to be professional, polite, and absolutely devastating. I started by thanking them for their letter regarding the industrial nature of my workshop. I told them I'd taken their concerns that my property looked too industrial very seriously, and that after careful consideration, I agreed with their assessment. The professional grade work I'd been doing as a hobby was indeed indistinguishable from a commercial enterprise. Then I explained that following their guidance, I had taken steps to rectify this ambiguity. As of the date on my letter, my workshop was now the fully licensed and registered headquarters of Ironwood Custom Designs LLC, a state-registered business specializing in custom furniture and fabrication services. I attached copies of my LLC certificate, my business license, and my approved home occupation permit. Everything official, everything legal, everything completely beyond their authority to regulate. But here's the kicker. I also attached a certified copy of their own CC&Rs with Section 2. B highlighted, showing that my property was explicitly excluded from their jurisdiction. I pointed out that their demands for inspections, their fines, and their violation notices were legally void since they had no authority over my property in the first place. I thanked them again for providing the inspiration to turn my passion into a proper business, and suggested they might want to review their own governing documents before making future demands of property owners. I sent the letter via certified mail to every member of the HOA board with copies to their property management company and their attorney. Then I sat back and waited. The silence was deafening. For almost a week, nothing. No angry phone calls, no threatening letters, no golf cart drive-bys. I was starting to think maybe they'd just given up and decided to leave me alone. Then that weekend, I decided it was time for the finishing touch. I had a professional sign made up and installed it at the end of my driveway where it meets the public road. Nothing flashy, just a tasteful wooden sign that read, Ironwood Custom Designs LLC, Fine Custom Furniture, by appointment only, with my business phone number. The sign went up on Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, I had my first phone call. It wasn't from a potential customer. It was from someone at County Code Enforcement, asking about reports of an illegal business operating in a residential area. I politely explained that I had all the proper permits and licenses and invited them to come take a look if they wanted to verify everything was in order. The code enforcement officer showed up Monday morning. I welcomed him into the workshop and showed him around, letting him examine all my paperwork. He spent about an hour going through everything, checking my permits against the actual setup, making sure all my safety equipment was in order. Finally, he closed his folder and smiled. He told me it was one of the cleanest, most professional home workshops he'd ever inspected. Everything was completely compliant with county regulations, my permits were in order, and my business was perfectly legal. As he was walking back to his truck, I noticed the HOA president happening to walk her dog nearby. She called out to him asking if I was being shut down. The officer looked at her, then checked his paperwork, then looked back at her. He told her that my property wasn't even in her HOA according to his records, and that my business was fully licensed and properly zoned. He said I was completely compliant with all applicable regulations and wished us both a nice day. I've never seen someone's face turn quite that particular shade of red before. She stood there for a moment like she couldn't quite process what she'd just heard, then turned around and marched back toward her house without another word. That was 3 months ago, and things have been pretty interesting since then. What started as malicious compliance has turned into something I never expected. I wasn't really planning on running a business when I retired, but it turns out there's a pretty good market for high-end custom work. I've taken on several commissions for custom furniture pieces, and word has spread through some of the wealthier neighborhoods nearby. I'm not trying to get rich or anything, just taking on projects that interest me and pay well enough to cover my shop expenses and then some. The HOA president still drives by regularly, but now she has to watch delivery trucks bringing in expensive hardwoods and specialty materials. She has to see clients in luxury cars driving through her perfect neighborhood to get to my driveway for consultations. There's even a small neon open sign in my workshop window now just because I can. Last week, I was loading a beautiful custom dining table I'd built onto a delivery truck when I saw her driving past in her golf cart. She slowed down like always, glaring at my sign and the obvious commercial activity happening on my property. I made sure to give her a friendly wave. The irony isn't lost on me. She tried to shut down what she saw as inappropriate activity on my property, and instead she provided the motivation I needed to turn my hobby into a legitimate business. Now, instead of just puttering around in my workshop for my own enjoyment, I'm running a successful LLC that generates real income and brings steady traffic through her pristine neighborhood, and there's absolutely nothing she can do about it. The best part is that everything is completely above board. I pay my business taxes, I carry proper insurance, I follow all the county regulations for home-based businesses. When the delivery trucks show up, they're delivering materials for legitimate commercial orders. When clients come for consultations, they're visiting a properly licensed business. I've even started advertising online and taking custom orders from people I don't know personally. Nothing huge, just enough to keep busy and justify having all this expensive equipment. Turns out there are a lot of people who want custom furniture but can't find anyone who can actually build what they're looking for. The workshop that used to be my quiet retirement hobby is now humming with activity most days of the week. I'm building dining tables, entertainment centers, custom cabinets, even some metal fabrication work for local contractors who need one-off pieces. And every time I fire up the CNC machine or start welding, I think about that first confrontation when the HOA president stood in my doorway demanding access to my workshop. She was so sure she had the authority to control what I did on my own property. She was wrong about the authority part, but she was right about one thing. What I was doing in that workshop really was indistinguishable from a commercial operation, so I made it official. Now, instead of complaining about hobbyist noise, she gets to listen to the sounds of legitimate commerce. Instead of worrying about one retiree using power tools, she gets to watch a steady stream of business activity that she has absolutely no power to regulate or control. Sometimes I see her standing at her front window watching delivery trucks navigate the narrow streets of her development to reach my driveway. I imagine she's wondering how a simple demand for a workshop inspection turned into a thriving business operating right in the middle of her perfect neighborhood. But she'll never ask, and I'll never explain. After all, she's the one who insisted my workshop looked too much like a business. I just took her advice. The business has been growing steadily, and I've had to make some adjustments to handle the increased activity. I installed a proper gravel parking area behind my workshop for client vehicles, and I upgraded my dust collection system to handle the increased production volume. All completely legal improvements that required county permits, which I dutifully obtained and posted in clear view. About a month after the county inspection, I got my first real test of the new business setup. A local interior designer had commissioned me to build a complete dining room set for one of her high-end clients. We're talking a 12-foot walnut table with matching chairs, a sideboard, and a display cabinet. The kind of project that takes weeks to complete and requires multiple deliveries of premium materials. The lumber delivery alone was quite a sight. A full-size freight truck had to navigate through the HOA's narrow streets to reach my driveway, carrying nearly $2,000 worth of hand-selected walnut boards. The driver had some choice words about the subdivision's road design, but he managed to get everything unloaded without incident. I made sure to be outside directing the unloading process when the HOA president drove by in her golf cart. She stopped and stared for a good 5 minutes, watching me inspect each board and stack them in my workshop. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out if there was anything she could complain about. There wasn't, of course. Commercial deliveries to properly licensed home businesses are perfectly legal, and my home occupation permit specifically allows for reasonable freight deliveries during business hours. But I could tell it was killing her to watch this obvious commercial activity happening right in her neighborhood without being able to do anything about it. The dining room project took me about 6 weeks to complete, working mostly during normal daytime hours. I made sure to follow all the noise ordinances, keeping my loudest work to the middle of the day and avoiding anything too disruptive early in the morning or late in the evening. Professional courtesy, you might call it. During those 6 weeks, I had a steady stream of visitors checking on the progress. The interior designer came by twice a week, the client came for a couple of consultations, and I had various suppliers dropping off hardware, finishes, and other materials. All legitimate business activity, all properly documented, all completely beyond the HOA's authority. The finished pieces were some of the best work I'd ever done. The walnut had this incredible grain pattern that really came alive under the hand-rubbed oil finish I'd applied. When the delivery truck came to pick everything up, I felt a real sense of pride watching my work get carefully loaded and transported to its new home. More importantly, the client was thrilled with the results, and word started spreading through the local interior design community. Suddenly, I was getting inquiries from other designers, referrals from satisfied customers, even some direct commissions from people who'd seen my work in person. Within 2 months of officially launching the business, I was booked out for the next 4 months. Nothing crazy. Just enough steady work to keep me busy and bring in some decent income. I wasn't trying to become the next big furniture manufacturer, just taking on projects that interested me and paid well. The HOA president's reaction to all this success was predictable. She started showing up at HOA board meetings with printed copies of county noise ordinances, trying to find some regulation she could use against me. She petitioned the county to review my home occupation permit, claiming the activity level exceeded what should be allowed in a residential area. Every complaint got the same response from county officials. My permits were in order, my activities were within the approved scope, and my property wasn't even subject to HOA oversight anyway. They were polite about it, but I could tell they were getting tired of her repeated calls. Then she tried a different approach. She started organizing the other HOA members, trying to build support for some kind of collective action against my business. She held a special meeting to discuss what she called the commercialization of residential properties and the threat to community character. From what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, it didn't go the way she'd hoped. Most of the residents didn't see my workshop as a problem. I'd been a good neighbor, I kept my property nice, and my activities weren't bothering anyone. A few people even mentioned that they'd driven by my place and been impressed with how professional and clean everything looked. One of my neighbors, a retired teacher who lives about a quarter-mile down the road, told me later that she'd spoken up during the meeting. She pointed out that having a legitimate business in the neighborhood actually increased property values by showing the area was economically viable and properly zoned for mixed use. The HOA president apparently got pretty heated during that discussion, insisting that residential neighborhoods needed to stay purely residential to maintain their character. But when someone asked her to explain exactly how my business was hurting anyone, she couldn't come up with a good answer. The meeting ended without any action being taken, and I heard that several board members approached the teacher afterward to ask more questions about property values and zoning issues. Turns out not everyone on the board was as eager to pick fights with properly licensed businesses as their president was. After that failed power play, the HOA president seemed to give up on official complaints and moved on to more passive-aggressive tactics. She started timing her daily walks to coincide with my work hours, stopping to stare whenever she heard machinery running. She'd position herself at the edge of my property line, just standing there with her arms crossed, like she was conducting some kind of surveillance operation. It was more annoying than anything else, but I figured if she wanted to waste her time standing around watching me work, that was her business. I just kept doing what I was doing, building furniture and running my legitimate business. The breakthrough moment came about 4 months after I'd started the LLC. I was working on a particularly complex piece, a custom entertainment center with intricate inlay work, when I noticed someone standing at my workshop door. I shut off the router and walked over to find a well-dressed woman in her 50s holding a tablet and looking around with obvious appreciation. She introduced herself as a local real estate agent and explained that she represented several high-end clients who were looking for custom furniture pieces. She'd heard about my work through the Interior Design Network and wanted to see my workshop firsthand. I gave her the full tour, showing off my equipment and explaining my process. She was genuinely impressed, especially with the quality of my finishing work and the precision of my joinery. She said most of her clients had been frustrated trying to find craftspeople who could execute the kind of detailed custom work they wanted. Before she left, she asked if I'd be interested in becoming a preferred vendor for her agency. Nothing exclusive, just a referral relationship where she could confidently send clients my way, knowing they'd get quality work delivered on time. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping for. High-end clients, interesting projects, steady workflow. I told her I'd be very interested and asked what kind of projects she typically handled. Her answer was better than I could have imagined. Her agency specialized in luxury home sales and often worked with buyers who wanted custom furniture to complement their new properties. We're talking about people who were spending millions on houses and didn't blink at paying premium prices for one-of-a-kind furniture pieces. She handed me her business card and said she'd send me some project specifications within the week. As she walked back to her car, I noticed the HOA president standing in her yard, pretending to water plants while obviously eavesdropping on our conversation. The look on her face when the real estate agent drove away in her luxury sedan was priceless. Here was clear evidence that my little workshop business was attracting exactly the kind of upscale clientele that supposedly added value to neighborhoods. But instead of being pleased that property values were likely to benefit, she looked absolutely miserable. That evening, I sat in my workshop planning out space for the expanded inventory I'd need to handle larger projects. I was thinking about adding a dedicated finishing room and maybe upgrading some of my machinery to handle increased production volume. The woman who'd tried to shut down my hobby had inadvertently launched what was turning into the most rewarding chapter of my retirement. Every time I looked out at her house and saw those perfectly manicured flower beds and regulation height grass, I had to smile. She'd wanted uniformity and control, but instead she'd created something she couldn't control at all. A legitimate business that brought diversity, activity, and economic value to her precious neighborhood, and I was just getting started. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm 24, living in my first place on my own. I'd rented a townhouse, this was back in the late 80s even when poor people could rent entire houses, and was putting myself through college. Not a lot of money to spare, but I was getting by. The townhouse was not detached, and I had two neighbors whose homes were directly attached to my own. I got along fine with my southernmost neighbor, aka we said hi when we saw each other and that was about it, but the other neighbor, he had a chip on his shoulder. Generally rude if we bumped into each other, I'd say hi or good morning, he'd ignore me, scowl, turn away, etc. Whatever, no big deal, I just took it in stride. Being a struggling college student, I didn't have a lot of money for non-essentials. Most of the people in the neighborhood poured weed killers on their lawns every spring. I didn't do this, for several reasons. Most important, I think it's a shame to poison the local water table. And while I love a nice lawn, I don't think you have to cater to grass. I prefer a more natural look. Back then, that meant regular grass, but with some crabgrass and dandelions. One day, Bob starts berating me over my dandelions. It doesn't fit the neighborhood. Don't you have any self-respect? You bring down the tone of the neighborhood. Every time he'd see me, he'd tell me I need to pour poison on my lawn, which I explained I couldn't afford and didn't want to do. At first I was polite as I wanted to be on good terms with my neighbors, but Bob started getting angrier and more unreasonable, started calling me poor white trash. One day I'm coming home, parking in my driveway with some friends from school in my car. As we're getting out, Bob comes outside and shouts, at the top of his lungs, "Get rid of those ducking dandelions!" He looks over and now spots my friends getting out of the car, and he's clearly embarrassed, but he doubled down and started talking directly to my friends. "Did you know your friend is an embarrassment to the neighborhood? How's it feel to be friends with white trash?" I had just about had enough of his anger by then, and I snapped back, told him to duck off and mind his own business. Several days later, I get a knock on my front door. Open up the door, and it's a bylaw enforcement officer. Says he's responding to complaints of noxious weeds in my backyard, and asks to come take a look for himself. Being a middle unit, the only access to my backyard was through the house. I invite him in, offer him a drink of, which he gratefully accepts, hot day, and take him through to the backyard. Lots of lovely white and yellow dandelions peppered over the yard. He takes one look and gives a deep sigh. There were no noxious weeds, which I knew full well, as I had long ago taken the precaution of checking with the city to see what was and what was not acceptable in the weed department, and I knew I was very comfortably, within compliance. The bylaw cop apologized for wasting my time, said my yard was nowhere near a problem. He left and went next door to chastise my neighbor for wasting his time. I stood at my front door and listened. It was glorious listening to Bob sputtering and angry, trying to defend himself and vilify me, all to no avail. My wife and I can't even sit out and enjoy our backyard because of all those stupid dandelions. Bylaw cop told him to stop harassing his neighbors and left. But listening in gave me an idea. I knew Bob liked to sit out on his back deck in the afternoons, so I waited. As soon as I spotted him out there, I walked out into my backyard, ignoring Bob as I gathered up a nice bouquet of white-topped dandelions, seeds ready to disperse to the wind. We had a 4-foot-high chain-link fence between our properties, so the view between yards was pretty much unobstructed. I stood at the fence, locked eyes with Bob, and started blowing thousands of dandelion seeds into his yard. The wind was at my back, so the seeds were traveling quite far into his yard. He grew red-faced and started yelling at me. "What's the matter, Bob? I'm just doing what you asked and getting rid of my dandelions." He yelled more, and I just ignored him. After depositing several dandelions worth of seeds, he went back inside. From that day forward, for the next several weeks, every single time I saw him out on his deck, I'd go out and send more dandelion seeds into his yard. Eventually, dandelion flowering season ended. I wanted to think that Bob learned a lesson about bullying, but he didn't. I'll post some of his other bullying attempts at some other time. The next one is an entitled people story. So this just happened less than an hour ago, and it is both funny and crazy. Context: I'm a 26YO woman. The setting is an authentic family Italian restaurant I went out to with my parents to celebrate their wedding anniversary on Saturday night. It's in a small town, but this restaurant is award-winning with divine food busy, and the staff are wonderful. My mom also thinks one of the waiter's chefs has a crush on me, LOL. Said that he has always said hi to her, and when we went to the bathroom near the kitchen where he was working, he smiled at my mom, then started looking behind her for me, but I wasn't looking. We have been to this restaurant a few times to celebrate birthdays, and with family a lot, and we've never had a bad meal. My parents have been a few times themselves and the staff like them, and even remember how my mom likes her wine. My dad also has a laugh with some of the waiters too, and they staff are always polite and can never do enough for us. Because this place is so busy though, they say to people to turn up in plenty of time, 10 minutes early. Now for the story. We had a table booked at 5:30 p.m. and the waitress told us we had it for 90 minutes until 7 p.m. No worries, plenty of time. It was a busy Saturday too. We enjoyed our meal and drinks, and because it was busy, there were some little delays with them bringing things, including our final special coffees and the last of my wine. While we were finishing, the people, 2 women and 2 men, who were next for our table turned up later than they should have, and when they did, it was really busy with others waiting for their tables. One of the women, the entitled woman of the story, was instantly glaring at my mom and made comments that they should be there, as in at our table, and was also glaring at another table that was empty behind us. Now we weren't sure which table was meant for them, but we were finishing our drinks as we had 5 minutes left, and that one from Karen's party even tried to sit at the empty table without the okay from a waiter, but was stopped by her husband and called back to wait. When the waitress came back to tell me and my parents, we got up so they could clear the table and finish our drinks near the bar and near the other people, including Karen. My mom had noticed her and the other woman glaring and just looked back at her. My mom is a good woman, but not to be crossed. She also said sorry to the waitress after we weren't sure about the time we were supposed to move and told her we weren't being slow. It was that the bartender was slow with the drinks due to things being busy. She was okay with it and thanked us for moving after we paid. We got our coats and walked with our drinks to finish them, and that is when Karen started. She said in a sarcastic way, "I'm sorry you had to get up and move for us." She was also quite close to my mum, and she doesn't do well with that. My mum said, "It's okay, thank you," and turned away to step back closer to the bar to finish her drink. The woman wouldn't leave her alone and kept talking to her loudly, standing close, and was nearly touching her despite my mum moving away. My mum then said firmly, "Go away!" and the woman gasped like my mum had just slapped her. The other woman did too and started looking around at others to get back up. She called my mum rude and still wouldn't leave my mum alone. My mum then said, "Please leave me alone," as this woman was making a scene and kept calling my mum rude. My mum then said, "Look, I'm sorry if I came across short, but I don't do well with people getting up in my face like this." While this was going on, some people and staff were watching, including the bartender who was looking apologetic at my mum but was busy. And as a former restaurant worker myself, I know that we could have risked getting in trouble or getting something nasty said to him, as well as a young couple sat at a booth near the bar that Karen and the other woman rudely sat at without permission, like this couple's table was for waiting. The woman still wasn't leaving my mum alone, calling her rude, and after mum said it was her anniversary and they were just there to enjoy a meal, the woman sarcastically said happy anniversary, still saying she was a rude woman and not backing off. At the point, the other woman and man backed off, and the other man, I think Karen's husband, looked embarrassed and eventually did when my mum just finally told her to leave her be or she'd be cursed. My mum jokes years ago she'd be burnt for being a witch because she knows about herbal remedies and things, and she walked away. She did gasp over dramatically and called my mum a witch. My mum just walked away from her near the couple in the booth and asked, was she in the wrong? The woman in the booth said no way, that she was awful and up in my mum's face, and told my mum about how Karen rudely sat at their table like it was a waiting room. They said she was awful and sorry that happened, and after we finally finished our drinks, we left. After we got home and got changed, my mum called the restaurant to apologize for what happened, and the nice bartender man down the phone said she had nothing to be sorry for, and told us Karen and her party turned up late. The man also said they know we wouldn't be rude, since we have been there many times, and each time are nice and tip well. He also hoped it didn't ruin my parents' anniversary and would come back again soon. My mum thanked him and ended the call. I and my dad also said she didn't need to apologize, but I understand why, and I'm proud of my mum. She's been through a lot, but she is a good person. So, yeah, F rude Karens who expect the world to revolve around them even when they are late and wrong, and be kind to people in hospitality. Anyway, thank you for watching.